expectations of how our people should be, based off of written accounts of a man that looks nothing like me. He could speak our language, but not from his heart. When he wrote our history, he set us apart. Abandoned and bruised, left alone in the dark. But I won't let that past define who I am. When I listen closely, I hear my ancestors chant. Tell our stories, redefine a past that was written for us before. Add a chapter, it's time to write a little more. Recast the future, it's time to let our story soar. This is my mana, my spirit, my soul. This is me. This is me. There is still so much that we have yet to learn, hidden in the archives that they couldn't burn. It is rooted within us. Look closely and you will see. You will see. So tell our stories. Redefine a past that was written for us before. Add a chapter, it's time to write a little more. Recast the future, it's time to let our story soar. This is my mana, my spirit, my soul. This is me. This is mana, this is me. This is mana. She spoke to the ocean and she sang with the trees. She can be heard in the quiet whisper of the breeze. She is everything I aspire to be. She is mana, she lives in me. She spoke to the ocean and she sang with the trees. She can be heard in the quiet whisper of the breeze. She is everything I aspire to be. She is mana, she is me. So tell our stories, redefine a past that was written for us before. Add a chapter, it's time to write a lot more. Recast the future, it's time to let our story soar. This is my mana, my spirit, my soul. This is me. This is mana, this is me. 'Cause I wanna bring power back to my people. Wanna bring power back to my home. Yes, I can bring power back to my people. I can bring power back to my home. Yes, I will bring mana back to my people. I will bring mana back to my home. Yes, I will bring mana back to my people. I will bring mana back to the planet that I call home. History repeats itself if we don't tread carefully. It opens doors to potential hypocrisy. If we don't learn from our mistakes, 'Cause you wanna get to work, but you're not moving. You say so much, but never listen. You say you wanna make a difference, but yes, you first need to change. You first need to change. Imperfect people, differences aside, we are all people. Yet we manage to form unequal opportunities, tear down communities, put a stopper to unity if it's a threat to our own greed. 'Cause you wanna get to work, but you're not moving. You say so much, but never listen. You say you wanna make a difference, but yes, you first need to change. Hey, 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 you first need to change. Hey, hey, yeah, if you just pause for a second, look around for just a moment, see the tired, the fed up, the hurt, and the broken, the existing lack of vision, where hate becomes religion, world's in critical condition, but we're in calm disposition. Privilege blurs our sight, we become blinded, shut off the world and become closed-minded. What direction are we heading in the world that we're living in? Stop, open your eyes, pay attention, and listen. The people are crying, the planet is dying, some leaders could be lying, and it's terrifying. The problems at hand won't just disappear if we just stand here. In your future, what do you hope to see? What kind of ancestor do you want to be? 'Cause you wanna get to work, so get moving. Open up your heart so you can start seeing the difference that we need, the change that we can be, the future you hope to see. I know it starts with me. I know change starts with me. Oh, 'cause history repeats itself if we don't tread carefully. It closes doors to any opportunity. If we fail, if we fail to be that change.
Wow, simply amazing. She is Mana. That was the amazing Mia Kami. We're so privileged to have her here with us to kick things off at this closeout celebration for Pacific women. Mia is a climate champion. She's a musician and a longtime campaigner with Walk On, Walk Strong for kids who are battling cancer. Mia is Tongan, but Fiji, we claim her. And of course, I think the whole Pacific claims her. Mia sets the tone for our celebration today because she is the Pacific of the future, the Pacific of now. And as we reflect on the last 10 years, it's wonderful to get this taste of all the passion and the power that is going to lead us forward into the next 10 years. So malo, Mia. So I'm so excited to welcome you all here, everyone who's tuning in, for this, the Pacific Women Shaping Pacific Development Closeout Celebration. Without too much more, I'm going to get things started with our opening remarks this morning. Remembering that what we're doing here today. So we've come together to welcome our partners, supporters, and friends as we celebrate nearly 10 years of Pacific Women. We've been privileged to support and work with partners and stakeholders, women and girls and communities across the region. We're going to do a two-part closeout celebration this morning to acknowledge with respect and gratitude the achievements of our partners over this almost a decade. The first segment is going to feature a panel of Pacific women leaders from the region reflecting on the successes and the challenges for partners in progressing gender equality. The second segment, which will come in the second half, will be a deep dive into some of the knowledge products that have been produced based on, reflection and collaboration with partners about what has worked when it comes to progressing gender equality. So on that note, I'm really pleased to introduce our opening remarks speaker. Sarah Golding is the head of gender equality at Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, or DFAT. She was posted to Suva 10 years ago, which is when we all met her and got to know and love her, and certainly claimed her as one of our own. Sarah is a long-standing friend of Pacific Women Shaping Pacific Development, and indeed of the women's movement across the region. So a very warm welcome, Sarah, and over to you. Naka.
Vinaka Valevu and Malo Mia. That's just such a beautiful way to start this celebration. Good morning, everybody. I'm so humbled to be with you this morning. It's an extraordinary privilege. I'm going to open, as is customary here in Australia, by acknowledging the traditional land that I'm joining you from, which is the land of the Ngunnawal people. I've had the privilege to learn how to do this acknowledgement in language, which I'll do now. Duara nuna, duara nunual, yangu nalawiri dunimanien, nunuwalwari duarawari, ningira dindi wangirali jinyin. It's a language that some thought was lost, but is emerging. People were imprisoned for speaking it in years gone by. I'm so privileged to be able to do this acknowledgement in the language that's nurtured this country for thousands and thousands of years, and to be able to join you in this celebration of everything that has been achieved by Pacific women over the last 10 years. Tara shared my secret that I was in Suva when the work began. I have another secret to share, which is that over my life, I've had the personal gift to learn from and work with some extraordinary Pacific women leaders. And I wanted to pay tribute to one who was one of my earliest mentors, Amalia Rokotuivuna, in this moment today. When I reflect on everything that's been achieved and all of those that are here online as attendees, some absolute champions of gender equality over a long, long time. If there's one thing that we know, is that the march to gender equality is something that you can't walk away from. It's something that you have to stay with for the long term, because the obstacles are many and the adversity is frequent. Yet all of you in this room, this virtual room, in all of these different spaces connected by the oceans of our region, continue, because you have a vision for our Pacific, our home, your country, our world. And if I think of a reflection from an intergenerational dialogue I was part of with a former executive director of the Fiji Women's Rights Movement who's with us today. When we get resistance and when there's backlash, that's when we know that what we're doing is working. And so we go on harder. Those words from Tara have inspired me in many environments over the last 10 years since I heard them. The vision that Australia has been so privileged to work with so many of you with is to support by standing in solidarity, standing alongside the exceptional change makers of this region who are on this line today and those others who aren't. I'm proud to be the person who gets to say that over this last 10 years, there's been more than 182 different initiatives that have been supported with 192 partners in all of our 14 Pacific countries. It's reached an impressive 1.5 million women in the region. There's been 130,000 women and children who've been able to access support services at times of crisis, including counselling, health and justice. And over 20,000 women who have had support to take on leadership roles at community, provincial and national levels. The decades and decades of work that's happened, led by women's rights movements in the region to support survivors of violence, has been one of the really standouts of this program. And 3 countries now have crisis centres for the first time ever. Kiribati, Chuuk in the Federated States of Micronesia and the Marshall Islands, and you'll hear from them in the panel. There's so much to be proud of and so very many lessons that you all know and that we'll get to share and grow as we look to the future, including through the continued support that Australia will have with the region, with the institutions and women and men who are active on these issues through the Pacific Women Lead program, which is building on all of this effort in the last 10 years of learning and partnership and more than 30 years of work in the region. I know that there are so many in this room who have led so much personally, professionally, and given so much to the success of this program. There are people from the Pacific and there are also people from here in Canberra in Australia who've just been so privileged to be part of the journey to shape this program and be with you all. And some of them are with us today. It's my privilege to thank you all for the partnership that we've had together and our commitment. The successes of the program belong to all of you. Thank you.
Naka Vakalevu and Dhanyabad, Sarah, for that absolutely warm and wonderful opening for our closeout celebrations here. So I know that Sarah has been up all night working on the very critical issue of vaccine access. So we will forgive you for slipping away when you need to. But thank you again. And I have to confess, I think that line you mentioned of mine, I probably stole from Virisila, who I'll introduce in just a moment. But thank you very much for that. And before we go into introducing all our panelists, though, we have a treat for you this morning. We'd love to play for you the Pacific Women Legacy video, reflecting on close to 10 years of challenges and achievements with our partners in the program.
2012, we've been on a journey, a collaborative, connected journey towards gender equality. The Pacific Women's Program was announced at a time when some of this work was just emerging. 10 years ago, several organizations were just starting up, while some Pacific Island countries were in their early days of developing laws and policies to protect the rights of women and girls. There has been so much progress since, and Pacific Women has been able to facilitate some of that work. But in all cases, we've been connected by the idea that the Pacific must be a place where women and men are equal citizens, where they have equal political, economic, and social opportunities. Pacific Women has been an unprecedented long-term commitment to achieving this vision.
Because of the support of donors and partners, past and present, including Pacific Women, we are now reaping the rewards of all the hard work done, such as the TICC, the Toget Irapuiro Counseling Center. We now see how women empowered through the work of True Women Council and TICC grew to be the strong and capable women. They can speak up about their problems, concerns, and important issues. They are now encouraged and willing to seek counseling without feeling held back by the expectation that women are the silent partners of men. It's not about us fighting men, it's more about breaking the silence, regarding violence against women and girls, and upholding the human rights, especially those of women.
So we are a women's fund, and our main mandate is to look for resources, both financial and non-financial resources, to support women's groups and organizations in Fiji. One thing that the pandemic has taught us this year is that we need to be a lot more flexible and a lot more adaptive. So while we are financing different projects and programs, we are also looking at building sustainable movements and learning from a Pacific culture which truly believes in shared values and sharing resources.
We thank you, Pacific Women, through the support in terms of financial assistance, and also our your technical experts that been bring us from a very far journey. Our culture is support the idea of gender equality. So we see this, there's a change coming in. We have now 6 members of women holding the local level positions in the island communities. Women are more reflected in the community level, with the hope that this continue to the national level and in the parliament sitting.
These are just some of the achievements of Pacific Women Partners. Through funding and other support from the program, women have been able to access justice, including survivors of violence, expanded opportunities to earn an income and accumulate assets, taken on leadership roles at the community, provincial, and national level, and share their ideas as well as learned from each other. We are also seeing initiatives supported by Pacific Women resulting in change across outcomes. For example, projects like the Markets for Change Port Moresby, a safe city for women and girls, and Safe and Prosperous Districts, which is committed to advancing women's economic empowerment, are now extending beyond empowerment to include leadership, inclusive of infrastructure development, and improved access to services.
Congratulations to partners on the results reached over nearly 10 years to achieve gender equality. Australia highly values our partnerships and the collaboration across the Pacific to achieve gender equality and women's empowerment. We've been pleased to support over 180 initiatives across 14 countries, 1.45 million people to access services, and 3 Pacific countries now have crisis centres operating where previously there were none. As an Australian woman of Pacific heritage, I have been inspired to work with the strong Pacific women of the Advisory Board, our grant partners, government, and the support unit. I'm delighted that our partnerships will continue through Pacific Women Lead. Finally, and with great respect, thank you for your partnership and congratulations for the results achieved.
As much as we've achieved, challenges remain. Pacific Women has been an unprecedented long-term commitment. Change, especially change that lasts, takes even longer. That's why supporting work that may be hard to see, such as the work of movements and coalitions, are critical to cementing gains toward gender equality.
One of the many ongoing challenges of women's involvement in decision making is the deep social and cultural norms that are entrenched in our systems that influence the way people look at women in leadership. We have 6.8% of women occupying our parliamentary seats, which is well below the 25% average on a global scale. This is why it is critical, important for us as Pacific leaders, Pacific women, to continue to contest these perceptions, to continue to talk about it, so that it helps to shift and influence people's perceptions, and to accept that women are legitimate and they are equal and important partners in developing our region.
As the Bible says, we all are equal. Being a leader is not being a bossy person or aggressivity. Being a leader is to at least treat everyone equally, and also let everybody involved in the activities that we go through.
My vision for the future is for young women and girls to be leaders, and I want to see the government to be more active on the law they set for women, like domestic violence.
I want to see a lot of programs like Equal Playing Field to run through schools, not only schools, but there are some girls who does not attend schools, throughout communities.
For me, that's the main importance of having a program like the Pacific Girl, is they provide a platform where us girls feel safe and secure to express our voices and our opinions. This ensures that our young ones and our young girls here in the Pacific reach their full potentials with having knowledge of all the social issues that we are currently facing, being empowered to speak, and just being empowered to help make a change in the society that we live in.
You know, as a woman with a disability and having experienced discrimination and also gaps in terms of decision making, it is crucial that we women, all women, work towards a gender equality world where everyone has a seat at the table and is also part of the decision making, and that these decisions are also sustainable and are realistic for us on the ground. But going forward, I think Pacific Women Lead has to be relevant, and that means all the issues of each woman in all their diversities has to be taken into account. We have issues of the regional, national gender priorities that we need to work on. We also need to strengthen our women organizations and machineries in the region, and I think it is important that we also must always highlight that gender-based violence is a huge problem for us. It's endemic in our region. But I think most importantly, we also need the men to be with us on this journey. It's only together that we can do so much.
Kudos to the partners of the Pacific Women Program. It is through your courage, strength, and passion that we're one step closer to achieving a truly equal Pacific.
Thanks very much for the video. It's wonderful to start this off with the faces and the voices of the women leaders, the young leaders who have really made this program and who are going to take it into the future. So thank you for that. So warm welcome to all our panelists. I just wanted to before I introduce you all, just let everyone know that we're recording this session so that we can share it with partners and friends who haven't been able to join us. Although we've got over 100 people online with us this morning. So thank you so much, everyone, for giving up your time during the 16 days busy period to be here, both panelists and participants. We're going to take some audience questions right at the end. And the way we're going to do that is you pop your questions into the chat box. So whenever you think of one, please go ahead and pop it in the chat. Our team here will be collecting them, and time permitting, we'll come to that at the end, but we may only have time for one or two, just to let you know. All right, well, on that note, I am thrilled and delighted to welcome our panelists here. On screen, we've got Daisy Alik Momotaro coming to us live from the Marshall Islands. You can see her there. She's a former senator of the Republic of the Marshall Islands and has experience at the highest levels of leadership and advocacy for women's rights. She's got decades of experience in community development, and we're really delighted to have Daisy join us this morning. Also on screen, we've got Ofa Gudendil Likiliki, the Director of Women and Children's Crisis Center in Tonga. She's a women's rights activist, a filmmaker, and of course, a driving force in the Pacific feminist movement. Welcome, Ofa, this morning. Also online and from Honiara this time is Savina Nongebaku. She is one of our longest serving Pacific Women board members. She's a disability inclusion and women's rights advocate. And she's also been part of the Pacific Women Lead Design. So great breadth of experience to come this morning. Savina, we're really grateful that you've been able to log in with the support of our colleagues in Honiara during this really challenging time for the people of the Solomon Islands. So know that we're all thinking of you, Savina, you and the women of Honiara and the Solomons, and we are really glad that you're coming to us to speak to these issues in your own voice and live from there, Vinaka. And of course, back here, I was about to say in studio, but in office here with us is Virsila Mbondromo, a longtime friend, but also, of course, the co-chair of the Pacific Women Advisory Board and co-lead of the Urgent Action Fund Asia and the Pacific. She's also a former head of the Fiji Women's Rights Movement and has been providing a lot of guidance as we go through this transition from Pacific Women to Pacific Women Lead. So getting right into things now for some exciting and interesting conversations with these amazing women. We'd like to kick off by thinking a little bit more about some of the issues that arose in the video. So we heard people talk about meaningful resourcing for gender equality. And we really wanted to start with thinking about what does meaningful resourcing look like for us and in our region. And Daisy, maybe we could come to you first. You know, Women United Together Marshall Islands, which you head, has a long history of work on women's rights in the North Pacific. But, you know, finding the resourcing to support that work and to grow that work is always a challenge. What has that experience been like for you over the last few years? Daisy, if I could come to you now. Vinaka.
Yeah, WoodMe was created in 1987, July of 1987. And although we were formally formed, you know, we endure many challenges. And one of the significant one I believe it's very important to share is, although our government created WoodMe in 1999, you know, they announced on the radio that they were withdrawing their support from us. And it scared many of our women. However, in 2002, we were able to revive and add our office and started our, we've been having a total of 5 violence against women and girls projects funded by different donors. And we had challenges, as I mentioned, in 2002, we had our first survey to measure if there was really significant percentage of violence against women in the Marshall Islands. And it came out that it was high. However, because, you know, we only surveyed 5 atolls, the government couldn't support us because they said the sample was too small. So in 2012 to 2014, we were able to have the family health study survey, and it came out very high significant. And we want to thank UNFPA for supporting the project Family Health Study. We were able to continue and we created Wedo and Noor. Wedo and Noor is the violence against women and girls project that started in 2016. But before it started, we were able to lobby our government. We had a project funded by UN Women. We call iBrave. iBrave stands for Initiative for Awareness on Women. And, you know, we were able to, the first aim of the project was to lobby our government to create a Domestic Violence Prevention and Protection Act. It was really a challenge because when we went into our lobbying, they couldn't listen to us. So we had to go our way by lobbying individual parliamentarian. And the session in September of 2011, the Bill 93 was introduced, Family Protection and Prevention Act, Domestic Violence Prevention and Protection Act. And after the lobbying, we organized ourselves, and we were able to go to the Parliament chamber with all of us wearing purple dresses with our women chiefs behind us. And we went and sit and sending text to our supporters. And that time we were able to have the bill passed into law. Although it passed into law, it was they didn't do any implementation. So I want to thank Australian government, Pacific Women Shaping Pacific. When they start funding us in 2016, we were able to stay on our own feet, and we're doing a lot of trainings for our policemen, both national and local police, including the students from the colleges in the Marshall Islands, and we have many supporters. So I want to thank them because our counselors are really confident in doing their work from their continuous support. And I think, what resources we have is just continue to advocate and build partnership with those relevant partners. We are able to gain support from all the relevant ministries, including the police department. I would say these are our main partners that are really coming strong to help us in these last 2 years. So I want to thank all the supporters, including with the Australian government. I also want to thank Spotlight and also the US government through HIOM and our own government, Marshall Islands. So thank you all.
Mopata, thank you, Daisy, for that insight. I think that, those struggles of trying to get that resourcing for this critical work and the recognition that the issue of violence against women is an issue in our communities is a long battle and a familiar one around the region. So thanks for sharing that. I just wanted to just remind everyone that when we go into the deep dive session in the second half of our program today, that Daisy, along with Kiki from FSM and Teresa from Kiribati, will be sharing some insights into this very exciting developments as they emerge as the newest crisis centers in our region in the North Pacific. So that's coming up a bit later. But first, Viri, I might come to you because resourcing for women's rights is your core work right now. And what does this meaningful resourcing for gender equality look like for you from a women's funds perspective?
I think from a women's fund perspective, but also from a feminist and a women's rights perspective, I think the most important thing for me about meaningful resourcing is, one, it has to be trust-based. What that looks like is actually speaking and listening to the people who are most affected by the problem you're trying to solve. So, whether that's women, women with disability. So trust, and that means listening and listening to the people who are most affected. I think it needs to be flexible. It needs to be long-term. And I think the final thing is really that you've got to resource the people and the ideas that, like basically core expenses. I think that's a really core thing, and it needs to be multi-year. One-off funding is not meaningful. Meaningful means that we recognize that change is long-term and that we are willing to invest and trust that process and put money into that, put resources into that.
Yeah, thanks, Viri. I think you've summed up really nicely some of the lessons learned that we've also learned from our collaboration with Women's Fund Fiji. Actually, there's a Pacific practice note coming out soon called Small Grants, Big Impacts. So that's not for today, but certainly will be available online soon, and really summarizing, I think, some of those lessons that you've outlined. I can see that we've still got Sarah on the line, so I might just see if Sarah's still there and might like to speak to this, Sarah, as someone in charge of heading up the push for gender equality within DFAT and thinking about then what meaningful resourcing for this work looks like, really from a donor perspective, but as someone who's also part of the movement itself. So yeah, Sarah, any questions?
Thank you so much for throwing to me, Tara. And I must admit, seeing all of you here, it's given me an extraordinary boost of energy after the late night. That's a really powerful question. And I think when we look at the information at its most macro level, there are two things that we know as committed people to work on these issues. One is that women's rights organisations in any country, anywhere, are absolutely central to seeing change, effective change that is transformative. And I speak of my own as well as any others. And the second is when we look at the landscape of international development financing, we know that there's just not enough financing available for dedicated work on gender equality. We also know that within the financing that's available, there's not enough that's available for to support women's rights organisations. And there's been a real push to try and shift that dial. And I'm really, really pleased that as part of the work that we've been able to support with Pacific Women Lead, Pacific Women Shaping Pacific Development, and with other programs, we're able to be part of that commitment to shift that dial. And a really significant element of that is to really recognise the dynamics of power that exist in international development. It shouldn't just be some brainchild of Canberra or brainchild of Paris or brainchild of wherever in a country that this is important. It is fundamentally about acknowledging the power and leadership of the women from the Pacific, of you Offa, of you Savinia, of so many of you Daisy, so many of you that are leading change in ways that work the best, culturally, contextually, and for us as donors, not thinking that we can shape that, but committing to back that. So that's my reflection. Over.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah, for that reflection. I really love that closing comment. Like, not being the ones to shape that, but committing to back that. And I think that's really at the heart of good development, and really at the heart of certainly, I think, a feminist approach to development, your discussion of power there. So thanks for that. We've actually got a little bit more time on this question, so I might just throw to the other panelists, Savina or Offa, if you wanted to weigh in on this at all. I'll just wait a bit and see if either of you wanted to come in on this question of what meaningful resourcing for gender equality looks like. Okay, well, we might move to the next segment and really circle back to this as we come to the closing, because we're going to be looking ahead before we close off at Pacific Women Lead and thinking about some of the lessons from this conversation as we move forward. So I might move then to the second sort of set of ideas that emerged from the video. And in the video, we heard Mariani, who's the Executive Director of Balance of Power, talk about the need to continue to contest perceptions around women's role in leadership. And I wanted to come to you first, Offa, because you've done a lot of work on this over the years. In fact, you've done so much work, you've been able to compare your earlier study to a much more recent study in collaboration with Balance of Power. What do you think has been working well as it relates to shifting these social norms and perceptions? And also, and perhaps more significantly, what else needs to be done? Because I think your own recent piece has shown us these perceptions are not easily shifted. Yeah, over to you, Offa.
Malo apito, kole pe kyo hu fanga te ngai fatap ko osoma paki ka ata pe mo kyo kawat he kita ta no ko pompong ini. I would like to acknowledge my oceanic roots from Talau, Pugamisi, Vava'u, and Vaini, Malapo, Tongatapu, Aleapata, Pangopango, Samoa, and Tamaki, Makaurau, Aotearoa. And I also acknowledge all the oceanic roots of the co-panelists and all the wonderful participants joining us this morning. I just wanted to start off with a quote that many of us hold dear to our heart, to just kind of dive into this Talanoa. We sweat and cry salt water, so we know that the ocean is really in our blood. And just paying tribute to Teresia Te Aiwa of Kiribati, and of course her Black American heritage as well. I use this quote because more recently, Dr. Yvonne Te Ruki Rangio Tangaroa Underhill Sem, one of our oceanic feminists, coined the audacity of the ocean metaphor. And I think that's what I really want to bring to this conversation, is that yes, the ocean is in us, it's in our blood, but it's time that we're audacious about it. We dive into a more audacious ocean with our audacity, and really claim it as our own as women, because like Marioni said, we're sitting at 6.8% of our women taking up seats in Parliament, the most powerful decision-making seats in each of our countries. And we have to question why. And of course, research has been done. Like you said, Tara, I've been following this since as early as 2005 in Tonga, and also with great interest across the Pacific. I repeat and reiterate what Marioni said. It comes back to the deeply entrenched cultural and social norms that translates throughout all our institutions, starting from our family, going out into the village, going out into the community, going out into our workplaces, our churches, all the spaces that we interact in daily, and right up to our government and Parliament. These are hard things to shift. It's not easily done. And there's a whole lot of thinking around it, of how we can start to change and shift these perceptions. And I was just in Hawaii, one of the outer islands recently, and they had 2 female candidates running in their constituencies. And of course, in Tonga's elections, which was held less than 3 weeks ago, none of our women were successful in getting in. So we're back to 0 women in Parliament. But one of the female candidates in Hawaii, the women were telling me, and even men were telling me, that she was not given a space to speak during the campaign. And when she went to approach, community leaders for access to the community hall to go and speak to the people, she was denied this right. She was denied this access. And this is 2021, after all the gender equality and equity commitments Tonga has made internationally, regionally, and nationally with our own gender equality, women's empowerment policy, we're still facing these deeply entrenched attitudes at the grassroots level, where it matters, because that's where we need to change the perceptions and the attitudes and the behaviors. And so we need to work with men, but we also need to work with women. There have been studies that have come out around the impact of patriarchy across the globe. And there's that belief that the most patriarchal societies are the ones where the women are fighting to keep it, to keep those belief systems, to keep those. And that I would say is where Tonga and a lot of our Pacific Island countries are in. We do need to work with our men, but we also need to continue working with our women. And one of those ways is to strengthen the movement. We've kind of lacked that. I mean, Fiji's been leading the way in this for decades, but we need to step back a bit and really reflect on, are we building movements, or are we just focusing on implementing activities, programs? And we need to, weave into that the strengthening of feminist movements on the ground, re-educating our women on what feminism means, because a lot of them are scared when they hear the feminist word. A lot of them are still scared hearing about women's rights. And so we need to do this whole re-education around democracy, but what does it mean to fully participate, the rights language, and also key feminist concepts. Malo.
Malo Ofa. Gosh, I always come away learning something new when I have a conversation with you. And I really can't sum it up because you've summed it up perfectly. But I think Yvonne, who's been a long time mentor and friend to many of us in the Pacific, I love that concept of the audacity of the ocean, taking it the next step further. Definitely we've all grown up in households. We know it's the aunties and the grandmas who are helping to enforce those rigid social norms because for a variety of reasons. And for people to be surprised that women don't vote for women, I mean, we're all part of that same structure. So absolutely agreeing with you there. Now, Daisy, I wanted to come back to you because you are a woman leader who has served at the highest levels of leadership as a senator for the Marshall Islands and seen, some of this firsthand and have broken through some of these barriers firsthand yourself. And I wondered if you were able to share some reflections on that.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I would like to continue acknowledging everyone. Yes, I strongly support what my sister Opa was saying, that, we truly need to need the support of the women to be on our side. For me, I felt that I had more male supporters when I was in the parliament. When I got elected and was in the parliament, we were only 3 women, but we could feel the support of the male parliamentarians supporting all the bills and resolutions we came up with. But in terms of, electing, I felt that I didn't have much support of the women. And I would like to share one thing, WoodMe is a part of the history of WoodMe. When we were created, in national election of general election of 1999, WoodMe, we received a flyer. It was a campaign flyer from our sister in PNG, and some of the it was a cartoon, and some of the picture in the cartoon was a picture of a man beating of a woman, and picture of a man like involved in corrupting government money. So what we did WoodMe, we translated the cartoon into our own language, and we printed it as a hat. And that time, the government announced it on the radio that they were withdrawing their support from WoodMe. And it was the wives, they were really mad with us. In fact, they called a meeting with the WoodMe officers and asked us, why did we have to put those in the ad in the paper? But obviously, because there were parliament candidates, they were involved in what the flyer, the campaign ad showed. And it was sad because it was us women, we were pulling each other's skirts and now not helping. And I really support what Opa was saying. And this is something we really need to work on. And from the what happened from the flyer, there were many women who got scared and did not come and support for quite some many years later. But we were happy we were able to. There were some, they were continuing to stay on, and we got revived in 2022 with our office and started with the other projects, further education project. And this is something I would encourage all the Pacific women, that maybe we come together and develop our civic education, further education project linking to women in leadership, so we can all educate our citizens, especially our women, that we need women in the parliament because we have different thinking than the men, that thinking are equally important to the men. And if we're there, now we only have back to two women parliamentarians in our parliament. But it is WoodMe's goal to have further education project that we would link to a Women in Leadership upcoming this January. So we can, our election is coming up in 2023. We don't stop here. We will continue to advocate. I think they advocate raising awareness to our women as very important, so we can get their support. Thank you.
Yeah, many thanks for those reflections, Daisy. And I think, you know, it made me think just earlier this week on Monday, it was Women Human Rights Defenders Day. And I was listening to Shamima Ali, who's a regional and Fijian Pacific feminist, recognize, you know, the great risks that women take in doing this work. And you really hit the nail on the head there, reflecting on Woodme's experience in 1999. It's not just the physical, the very real physical and life-threatening kind of risks, but it's also the way that you get shut out of resourcing, that you face social risk. You know, women get ostracized for stepping out of line or stepping up into leadership. And you really underlined that for us. So thanks very much for that, Daisy. But nonetheless, persisting, which is, I think, the amazing feature of all the leaders we've got on this panel today. And now we've also got Savina there. And Savina, I know we weren't originally going to ask you about this, but we've got a bit of time. And, you know, I wanted to just come to you because you've played this leadership role now in this regional program for many years. You've also, you know, been an advocate at the regional and national level, yet as a woman and a woman with disability, you know, there may certainly perceptions would be working against you, Savina. And I wondered if you had any reflections to share.
Thank you, Tara. I think women leadership has always been, you know, a journey for any one woman, and our journeys are always, you know, different. But I think for me, as a woman and a woman with a disability, I came into the leadership role like, you know, it wasn't planned, but God knows best. I was, you know, I came into the arena, you either sink or you swim. So I swam, but I think leadership in our region has always been a tricky conversation, depending on where you come from. But I think for women with disabilities, you know, our disability, our socio-economic status, our status in the family, in the community, usually works against us. So for me, it has been a journey that, you know, made me, I guess, as a woman, grew. And it has been a journey where I also tried, you know, to take as many women with disabilities, young women with disabilities, with me on this journey. It's not a easy journey, like you all know, but nevertheless, I think if you have the passion, the support, and you know, the partnership that you enjoy with other organizations, NGOs, feminists across the region, you know, there's always opportunity that you know, support comes along with your partnership as well. But I think leadership, women have always are born leaders, I think, in their own homes. It's only when when the arena changes that we face problems. But I'd like to say to young women who are probably listening, it's a journey that many of us are called. Some say they are born leaders. Some say leaders. Some are born leaders. Some, you know, make their ways through the world. But regardless of where you are, I think you always have a role to play. And I think for women with disabilities, the leadership is always a challenging one. Nevertheless, I think we have rose to the occasion and have proved ourselves on many fronts that we are capable leaders in our own communities, and we need to work harder than most people, I think. But I think it's also important that partners also in our journey also, celebrate the potential that women with disabilities bring to the table. So I think that's my small comment on this. Thank you, Tara.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Savina. Really appreciate that, because I think you also highlighted for us that while we're talking about the ongoing work we need to do with women in the community, that's not just an automatic, the support, but yet, amongst our sisters in the movement, those who are doing this work, there is that solidarity and support. And I know oftentimes, for example, when we've been facing risks in Fiji, it's the solidarity and support of feminists elsewhere who've got us through. So, I think that segues really nicely to the next piece that we're going to talk about, because we've heard from a number of young leaders on the video. We heard from Ana Malia Falemaka and other young leaders about their vision for the future. Now, there's been some exciting work done to foster young women's leadership, to basically just make way and make space, because they know best how to move forward. And before going into the question, though, I should mention, I totally recognize that we don't have a young woman on our panel today. But I also want to mention that's because we also respect the fact that they are busy, important people with exams on at the moment. And so, we're privileged to have Mia join us today, but we weren't able to get others because they do have competing priorities. So we're glad they're in the video and we're hearing them in other ways. But just moving on, how do we then best support and foster, supportive intergenerational leadership and intergenerational movement for change? Viri, I might come to you first.
I think that for those of us who have convening power, who have the power to bring people together, that we be intentional about creating that space, about giving that space to not only intergenerational, but to a group of people, both young, old, come from different economic backgrounds. So it's not just about the age thing. I think it's also about the other intersections. That's also, I think, a really important factor that we need to consider. I think the second thing too, that I have to say that this is, for me, is a work in progress, is about being reflective and aware that multiple perspectives means we have richer discussions and we have better solutions for the problems that we face in the world. That it's really important to recognize that dissent is part of a supportive process. It's not about creating echo chambers. Yeah. I think the final one is also something that, again, I also struggle with, again, it's a work in progress, is that we all got to check our power, privileges and power, right? And I think it's really important that when we are doing that, that we recognize that what we're trying to do is bring our use our power to bring power to, empower with young people, and an intersection of feminists and activists around the region to try and resolve the problems that is facing the region. For me, those would be the three things: be intentional, be reflective, and check your privilege and power.
Thanks, Viri, for so kind of succinctly bringing us to the point there. And I really like you broadening out what we're talking about here, which is we're talking about an intersectional, intergenerational movement building. It's more than just age. It's class, it's place, it's disability, etc. Gender conforming and non-conforming, diverse sexualities. Exactly. Thanks for underlining that for us. Now, Orpha, you've been doing a lot of work, both on kind of Pacific feminist movements, having dialogues across North and South divides, but also back home with young people, young women, young men. I wonder what's your reflection on this concept of building an intersectional, intergenerational movement? Malo.
Yeah, thanks, Tara. I think I'll return to the metaphoric use of Yvonne's audacity of the ocean, because it can help us reconcile the tensions of what Viri is talked about, rightly so, unequal power and unequal privileges. And I think this this attempt to relook at how we reconnect with women in all their diversities, and this is both young and old, if that's how we want to frame it. But I think also women who are in powerful positions, I'll just talk a bit later about what we're doing with the young girls, but I wanted to just take a moment to reflect on women who are in very powerful positions in our country, but are not in alignment with our core principles around women's rights and the feminist perspectives that we hold. And I think, we need to break down those barriers. We need to really get into a safe space. I mean, the young woman who spoke in the video, all three of them talked about safe spaces. And we also need to create those safe spaces for the women who are in powerful positions. Like, I come across women in powerful positions in Tonga every day, and we don't think alike. And that's a huge problem, because they're in the spaces where key decisions are being made. And so while we are working on building the movement and bringing our young women in, that's equally as important as bringing in these women who are already in these powerful positions to join the conversation and to unpack and get them to understand their power and their privilege from, what could they do that, what's a revolutionary move that they could do while they have that power to change the story for women and girls.
Malo Ofa. I think that's a really interesting point you made. It made me think of, I think it was about 2017, and Linda Peterson, the former head of the support unit, she convened this women's leaders dialogue. And Biri, I think you were part of it. Sharon Bagon-Rolls was part of it, but it brought a range of women leaders, both from government and from civil society, together with Dame Meg in a closed private space. And, I was lucky enough to be a fly on the wall there and listening to women talk about the challenges of being a woman in those very senior roles. And then, therefore, how additionally risky it is, I guess, to try and move some of the issues around gender equality. So, I think it's a shame that there aren't more of those spaces, so you can start to dive a bit deeper and really provide the support for those women in power to push the agenda. Savina, I know we were just talking a moment ago about leadership, but when we're thinking about building intersectional movements, certain parts of the region having access to being part of a Pacific movement. So for example, women and young women in rural areas of the Solomon Islands having the connectivity to link in, some of those challenges, but also thinking about, including in particular young women with disabilities who might be particularly marginalized. So wondered if you had any reflections on this idea of supporting, sustaining intergenerational, intersectional movements. Over to you, Savina.
Thank you, Tara. I think for intergenerational leadership, it is crucial. I believe intergenerational leadership will lead to sustainable development in our respective region or countries. But I think the important thing for me for this particular session is, when we talk about this, what are we actually talking about? I think it's important that we need to know about leadership. What does it look like for different people, for different groups? What needs to be done to enhance leadership for these different groups? In the video, we heard that some girls don't go to school. So how do we do this for them? What does it look like? What would it look like? What should it look like for them? And I think that in itself is a challenge, but it's not impossible, I believe. But there has to be a hunger for everyone involved to do this. It cannot be just the one partner, calling out in the wilderness for this to happen, it has to be, a common hunger for women in our region to be able to do this intergenerational. There has to be also an enabling space, and my two other colleagues have mentioned that is needed for genuine, building of leadership. And it is also important, whilst we tend to look at, building the capacity of young women, the circumstances they might be in is something that we might not have power over. But I think understanding the limitations of one person or one group, but also trying to embrace their potential is crucially important in this journey. And I think our cultural ways also, in our own ways, give us ways of reaching out to groups. And I think, many times we tend to, there's an email, it has to be an email or an official email from someone to someone to set up a Talanoa session. I think our cultural settings and our context also give us a space. And we know best how to connect. And again, our partnerships, solidarity, standing together, it also feeds into this, and it should be a positive for intergenerational leadership. For women with disabilities, this is a hard one. Most of the girls don't go to school. So again, I come back to, so what does that look like? How do we enhance it? And it will take probably, many partners to be able to work on this. Having said that, I think we are in the region on a journey where everybody is recognizing, the work and also valuing the work that each group or each person brings into the journey of towards gender equality. So I think those are my comments, Tara. Thanks.
Thanks, Savina. I particularly appreciated the timely reminder that it's not every important conversation happens in a Zoom room like this, that we have other cultural contexts and spaces for having important conversations. So thank you for that reminder. Just in terms of the, building intergenerational movements, I just wanted to mention that as part of our deep dive in the second segment, we're going to have one of the 3 deep dives will be with Pacific Girl, which is our program with adolescent girls in largely in Tonga, Solomon Islands, Papua New Guinea, Fiji, Chuuk in FSM, and also in Tonga, like I mentioned. Yeah. All right, great. So that will be happening after this, and we'll be we're lucky enough to get one of the adolescent girl leaders from Fiji who will be able to join us for that session. So that'll be an interesting one. Keep an eye out for that one. In the meantime, I might move us forward into the sort of final round of discussion before we open for questions. So a reminder to the participants listening in, just pop your questions there in the chat box because we'll be coming to you shortly. Now, in the next bit, I wanted to talk a little bit about looking forward into the next phase of programming, but the next phase of renewed effort, the next phase of pushing for gender equality. And I'm glad to see that we've still got Sarah hanging in there despite, I think, about 2 hours sleep. So it'd be good, perhaps, Sarah, if we could come to you on this one. Now, we're thinking ahead about this next phase of DFAT's regional investment and partnership with the Pacific on Pacific Women Lead, where a significant portion of the program is going to find a new home within the Pacific community, within SPC. And that they will be providing that regional leadership for this new gender equality work. What does this signal to you about any shifts in how development partners might be operating? And perhaps more excitingly, what are you looking forward to in the next phase under Pacific Women Lead? Over to you, please, Sarah.
Thank you so much. I think if there was one thing that I would say that it means to us is that we are learning in this journey with you, and we are listening. And when you have asked for the work in the region to be embedded in the region, to be owned by the region, to be led by the region, and for us to stand with you, then that's what that signals, is that that institution is the region's institution. We're a part of it, just like we're part of this, but it's a very different dynamic. And it's much more about acknowledging the strength of the region's own institutions and leadership and coming in alongside it. That will be my reflection. Over.
Thanks, Sarah. That's a really powerful reflection, and it's a new, challenging approach. It's going to be exciting though, and we're all looking forward to seeing what happens. I'm going to come to Savina in a moment, but I might come to you first, Viri, because apart from the big component of Pacific Women Lead that will be led by SPC, another part is a significant partnership with Women's Funds. And so what are you looking forward to under Pacific Women Lead?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to acknowledge what Sarah said, right, about listening and learning. And I think that to me also, it's a risk, is the fact that it would have been easier for a big funder like DFAT just to fund one mechanism like SPC, right? But they're taking a risk on recognizing that this isn't a one-size-fits-all, that there are different ways to approach this issue. And these different approaches, they're willing to spread their risk around. So one is, working with the Women's Funds, one's working with SPC, one is working with a multilaterals. So having these different approaches, I think, recognizes that they're willing to, they've heard us, they recognize there are different ways of dealing with a particular problem that we have. So for me, I think that's really important. I think what's also important, which is about to me, what I'm looking forward to is that this program is going to be truly led by Pacific women who are going to be shaping the Pacific development and leading Pacific development, right? So I think that's really important, from the governance, vision, to the implementation, to the learning, to the monitoring, and to the adaptation. So that whole process is being led by Pacific women. And I think for a big funder like DFAT and a partner, recognizing that and trusting us with that, I think that's really powerful. And for me, what I'm looking forward to is that other funders become partners and start taking the same beat that DFAT has taken. Yeah.
Thanks, Viri. Yeah, I really appreciate those reflections. It's going to be exciting. You're right. It's risky, but it's going to be exciting to see how we can all collectively make this work. So Savina, thinking about how the next phase of programming is really built on and continues to build on really decades of work by women and women's groups in the region. You've been a part of the Pacific Women Journey for many years, and part of the design, and now helping send us off in transition to Pacific Women Lead. I wondered, what's your reflections on this, and what are you really looking forward to under the new program?
Thank you, Tara. I must say, 10 years has gone so fast. It seemed like yesterday that we were, approached to be part of this advisory board, and some of us grew, professionally through this journey with the board. But I think for me, I have had the pleasure of seeing many positive things happening as a result of this program, with 14 countries that have, benefited from funding from the Pacific Women Shaping Pacific Development. And I think the way that development partners there is a shift. I think they are, we, the women, have grown louder, our voices have grown louder. We've demanded, and I think they've listened, like my other colleagues say, but they're also recognizing the strength that we bring to the table and the values. And we worked hard throughout the years to build these values and the strength. So I think the development partners have listened and they have acknowledged that we do have the power to be able to do what we do best. The journey for Pacific women, it's a journey that I truly appreciate. But I think having been part of, so with a design team, Tara, you and I were on this. It was a long process for us, but I think truly we are now owning this program. These are Pacific women. We've sat through consultations, healthy discussions, and I think now with Pacific Women Lead, I am so excited. I'm very optimistic. And it's been a pleasure being part of the journey, but I think we own it now. The Pacific women have spoken, the development partners have listened, and now the onus is on us, to take this forward. And I'm particularly glad seeing the youth, component in the Pacific Women Lead coming up. We have working groups that are there now. But I also, it's exciting to see that this platform is also, an enabling environment for young leaders. So I'm very excited, Tara, and I look forward to seeing the great work that this program will definitely bring. And I'm looking forward to the many great stories that are coming. So it's been a pleasure and serving as a board member. And yes, I salute all of you for your work in your respective countries, but also the value, the strength that you bring together as women of this region. So thank you, Tara.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Sabina. I really appreciate it. And I've so enjoyed working with you, collaborating and strategizing with you on all this work. So we might just swing over to some of the questions that have been coming in from the participants now, and I'll just throw them out to you. And then time permitting, we'll just come back for some final reflections from the panel. So one of the very early questions that came up, and it was actually for you, Sabina, but other panelists may like to jump in. And it was a reflection coming out of the video. How exactly can men help support gender equality? Are there specific initiatives that are already involving men, Pacific women initiatives that are involving men? Are there any specific strategies that have been working well? So I might come to you first, Sabina. That one was directed at one of your comments in the video, and then see if any others would like to comment.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Sarah. I think the Pacific Women Board is also a reflection of how we try to also take men on this journey. So, we had men on the board as well. So I think it is important that my comment in the video is saying that we need to have men. It's no secret that men are the perpetrators for most of the violence. So, we cannot be talking about gender, eliminating gender-based violence if we are not taking other men with us. I believe in our respective countries, we also have men advocacy organizations. Now, these are little groups that we, women could work with. But it's also important for partners as well to acknowledge that men have a role as well. Maybe more important in this journey with women. And I think whilst most of our Melanesian countries have men, as the bosses, so to speak, we need to also challenge the thinking around that. And I think for Solomon Islands, I can say that we have men advocacy organizations that are here, but they also need support. And I'm happy to say that I think the Ministry of Women, Children, Cultural Affairs, and Family Affairs here has had a great connection with this group. So, you know, I come back to my comment and cultural context. You know, we know best how to connect, to network. So I think in respective countries, you have your own ways of, you know, reaching out to the men. But I think it's crucial, it's important that we recognize that men have to be with us on this, whilst building our own women movements respectively.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks very much for that, Sabina. And it was a good point you made about the men we also have had on the advisory board. For example, at the moment, Paula Vivili from SPC sits on our advisory board and is, you know, one of our allies in advancing gender equality. But also there are a number of other initiatives under Pacific Women. I think one that's been working really well that comes to mind is the family teams approach. So it's ostensibly an economic empowerment project that in Papua New Guinea, in the coffee projects, in the coffee industry, but really it's been helping to balance the power within households when it comes to making decisions around resources and assets and income. It's been very interesting. But I wondered if anyone else wanted to comment on that question. I'll just wait a beat and see if any of the other panelists want to comment. Otherwise, we do have a number of other questions coming in. Okay, then I might just move on to the next question. There was a question coming in for Offa from young women, and it really was that point. This is from a young woman in Papua New Guinea with the equal playing field. And she was thinking about she wanted to know what you think, Offa, about the strategies that would help to change the mindset of those women in power you were talking about, and to kind of create opportunities for them to work together and mentor and train young women leaders. So I wanted to hand back to you for that question. Inaka.
Thank you, and thank you to the young woman who has asked this question. I'm just going to speak from experience. I have found that finding a safe space is first and foremost important, because if you approach women who are in power already and have you know, decision-making powers and privileges in spaces where too many things are going on. So for example, if it's a national meeting or a workshop on a specific topic, or a place where, or a public place where there are other people around and the environment is not safe to have those really heartfelt conversations and really courageous conversations, it's not going to happen. So what I've found is, from my experience, when I've really valued one-to-one conversations, and it can also happen in a larger space with more women around, if it's just you and the woman, so that you can unpack all the things that are tied into that entrenched belief of, you know, the stereotypes, the roles, and the responsibilities that our culture, or that our narrowly defined biblical texts define that women should stick to, and those that men should stick to. And I think you need that safe space. That's the most critical. Then the person who's holding the talanoa or holding the conversation really needs to know their stuff. They really need to know and how to unpack the issues and to respond to challenging questions, and to do it in a way that you don't make the other person feel, you know, when we're talking about the you would know this, taking adaptive leadership, we don't want to make it too uncomfortable for that person that they will turn off, you know. And so we want to be able to have, and I don't think we've invested in this enough, in getting really good talanoa facilitators, people whose role is to really just hold that talanoa, that conversation, those critical conversations that can get the person who's thinking the total opposite of, and has the total opposite belief systems and thinking, to really understand from, you know, your perspective and the women's rights perspective of what we're trying to achieve. Because we already understand how they're feeling and how they're thinking, because we live with people like that. You know, we have mothers and aunties, like Savina said earlier, we have mothers, aunties, sisters, brothers, uncles who already think against how we think. So we already know what their perspective is, but we really need to explain it in a way that it's not too threatening for them. And I know, you know, for feminists, it can be hard, it can be challenging to be a bit more diplomatic in our approach. But I think in each situation, you have to, like, you know, test the waters. It's that diving into the audacity of the ocean and knowing, as a Talanoa facilitator, who am I speaking to and how are they going to receive this story or this message that I've come with, and with the end goal in mind, that you're trying to shift their perspective in a good way. I hope that gives you a bit of insight, but I would love to talk with you more if you want to jump on Zoom with me another time.
Malo offer, that I feel that was really helpful, and just reiterating your offer there. So Equal Playing Field, young women leaders, offer would be happy to chat through that a little bit more. I might shift us to the next couple of questions, because they're all sort of related to this point about working with structures, institutions, those in power, and trying to shift their perspective to help shift norms and structures that affect women and girls. So the next question I think is very interesting is, what strategies have been working? When we're looking back, what strategies have we found working when it comes to working with faith-based organizations, churches, etc., and traditional leaders? So, you know, Daisy, I'm thinking about your context there in the North Pacific and wondering if this is one that you've had experience in that you might like to speak to, on what strategies have worked for you and for WoodMe when you're trying to engage churches and traditional leadership structures. Inaka. Oh, sorry, Daisy, I might just need you to unmute.
Yeah, thank you, Tara. You know, one strategy we use, you know, we found out, you know, when we started WoodMe, we had the women traditional leaders. They were very strong, and Marshall Island is a matrilineal society where their power is we inherit land titles through the lineage of our women and mothers and grandmothers. The women chiefs, they were very powerful, you know, when we established WoodMe many years ago. And majority of them are like, they passed, but they were like the backbone of WoodMe. And this is something, you know, we're trying to, we found out that, you know, they were our strength. And lately we just had our second Women Chiefs conference, end of the last week in June, because we found out that after not having meetings because of the dengue outbreak in the Marshall Islands, and then the COVID-19, we haven't had meeting for close to 3 years. So we just had the meeting in June of 2021, and we found out it was very useful to come with another second conference for women chiefs. We found out when we empower them, build their capacity, and teaching them what they need to learn about gender equality and all these policies and laws that are related to the violence against women and girls law. We found out when they understand, they really it's really driven them to do their part, because they also understand, you know, their role as the woman leader in our society. So this is some strategy we use, you know, to work through our women leaders, the women chiefs leaders. And we also continue to WoodMe in our bylaws, you know, all the local governments are our first partners. And this is something we continue to work with our local governments, like the mayor from each of the respective local governments, including their council. It's something we feel, you know, like is strengthening the organization. Thank you.
Many thanks, Daisy. Thanks for that. Those really rich reflections. Viri, I know this is an unusual question to pose to you, because it has been more challenging working in a feminist organization like the Fiji Women's Rights Movement, which works more with the formal structures rather than the traditional structures. But have there been, in your experience, any strategies that have worked when it came to engaging with traditional or faith-based organizations?
Yeah, actually, I was hoping you'd ask me that question. Yeah, I think that for me, one of the things that I've had to, one, face my own fears. And one of those fears was recognize that I do have the power and privilege as an Indigenous Fijian woman that comes from a particular part of Fiji. And so really recognizing and kind of owning that power, right? So now one of the things that I'm recognize, especially now that I'm getting older, is like always saying where I'm from, like from my father's side, from my mother's side, because what I recognize in the Pacific, we are about we have relationships. Our resources are relational, and we're always about the collective. And I remember when I first started off as a liberal feminist, this idea of the collective was, it just went totally against from a liberal feminist and looking at it in terms of laws. So now I'm more accepting of that side of me. So I think one is owning your power as like for me as an Indigenous woman. And also recognizing that when you're speaking to people in a traditional role, have a traditional a role of authority, that you have to recognize that role, right? So, and also recognize that when you're bringing your ideas across, it creates fear. So one is you have to understand what is their fear, what is the loss that they're going to feel by you bringing across this idea. And so it's trying to deepen that understanding. And so for me, it is about, again, digging deep into my relationships, trying to talk it through using my own language. Not the greatest at it, but I fumbled through it. But that's a way of building trust. So it's also recognizing that you are stepping into a place of discomfort yourself, and work using that fear to be able to deepen each other's understanding, to recognize that what we are both trying to achieve is really to the benefit of the greater community, the benefits to both of us as well as the community that we're part of. And I think that that's something that, again, it's something I'm not always successful at it, but I'm constantly working on it, and I'm always working with groups. Like now I'm trying to work closer with groups who are more in touch with this sort of traditional power and authority, and working with them to deepen my own understanding, but also to create space for me to be in that space. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but yeah.
No, I think it's really interesting reflections, Mary, especially that that evolving over time and coming to grips with the various aspects of our identity and our collectives that we are part of, and being able to use that in a useful way to shift our work forward. Definitely. I think that's interesting, especially like for you and I, we come from quite different cultural backgrounds. Yes, Indo-Fijian background for me, but also really from migrant peoples who have found a home here in the Pacific. But I think what's common in what you were saying was the power of language. So for us, Fiji Hindi, or Fiji Baat, as we call it, is grounded kind of, my language comes from the sandy, sand of the Rewa Delta. And it's powerful to be able to speak that to others and make that connection to shift difficult issues, because they find a familiarity and comfort. You're able to connect at that level.
And actually, just to make another point there, and I think this was also one of my discomforts before about recognizing my own Indigenous, my own indigeneity, was because I think that a lot of the idea of indigeneity in Fiji in particular is tightly linked to this idea of ethno-nationalism, right? Which are two separate things. So for me, as a person who's married to an Indo-Fijian, who have lots of friends who are Indo-Fijian, trying to reclaim my indigeneity is also uncomfortable, because I don't want to be seen as being like racist or ethno-nationalist, right? So it's about how do you manage those powers to both deepen gender equality, but also to deepen our understandings of what racial, ethnic harmony looks like, particularly in a country that has been, we've been divided based on ethnicity. So it's a ground that we have to tread on. And when I see what's happening in Solomon Islands, this is something that you would understand them. It's obviously not about Indo-Fijian and Fijians, but it's an issue there as well. Too. How do we reconcile that? Talk about ethnic issues, but also about advancing gender equality. It's not happening in a vacuum. I think that's the point I'm trying to make here.
Yeah. Absolutely, hearing you. I mean, it brings us back to that issue of building intersectional movements and understanding issues are more than just about the single thread of gender or just about the single thread of ethnicity or rural urban, but it's all of those things at the same time, and they exist together. Yeah, thanks for those reflections, Viri. Just having a little peep at the time and thinking that it might be a great moment for us to bring the Q&A to a close and to come back to the panel for a final round of reflections. So I might come to you first, please, if I could, Savina, just for any final reflections that you might like to share, either on any of the questions or really just as we bring this first part of the segment to a close. Over to you, Savina.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank you and your team for the support throughout my years in the board. You've always been an exceptional team, but I'd also like to pay my tribute to the women that have come before me, those that have stood on their shoulders today. I think this journey for us women, all women, it has been a long journey. We've been through, a lot of problems and all that. But I think as women, we are resilient in our own ways. And I think the Pacific women, is the injection that we needed in the region. And it's heartening for someone like me, to see that this program has, benefited many. And I think, but I will raise it here that I think, women with disabilities are slowly but surely getting into that fold. But I think that the journey for the last 10 years have brought a lot of positive issues for women. And I believe, and I'm totally excited that the next phase for Pacific Women Lead will be extra special. And that Pacific women will rise to the occasion and be the brilliant women and the leaders of this region as we always have been, to take us into the next phase with the support that has always been there. And I'd like to also thank the Australian government and people for their support to gender equality in the region. And I would also like to note that I think you and I will also need to work with our respective governments that they need to spend more on women and gender-based violence and gender equality in our respective countries. So thank you, Tara.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Savina, especially for that last strong call to action. From Savina, let's take it to the North Pacific. And let's come to you, Daisy, for any final closing reflections that you might like to share as we draw to a close. I think Daisy might just be off frame for a moment. So if it's okay, Offa, we might come to you first then. Malo.
Malo, Tara. Look, I think Yvonne will be delighted to hear me repeating and reiterating the term that she has famously coined. But I truly, honestly believe that this next journey that we're all moving into is our dive into the audacity of this ocean. You know, a lot of it is unknown, We're still yet to explore and experience what that journey will be like. But I think DFAT has become much, much better at listening and looking within themselves to right the wrong of so many years of unequal power and privilege, unequal voice, unequal participation, and shifting that whole kind of perception of donor recipient to now developing more equitable partnerships. And my call to action on both sides is that we continue to nurture the relationships. And that this is critical, and it's embedded in our oceanic Pacific cultures, is to take care of each other. That's the bottom line. Take care of each other, nurture our relationships, tau he tau wā, so that this journey will be meaningful, not just for us working in this space, but for the women and the girls and the men and the boys who we serve to achieve this wider vision of equitable societies for all, for everybody and all their diversities. Māloa pito, thank you for inviting me. Ofa lahi atu.
Māloa pito ofa. Wonderful to have you with us as always, and inspiring us. I think Ofa is where feminism meets poetry and takes us to quite a beautiful place. All right, I can see we've got Daisy back. So Daisy, we would love to hear your final reflections for us at this closeout this morning. Inaka.
Yeah, thank you, Tara. I'd like to join with my other sisters, Ova and Sabina. Yeah, we would. It's very important that we journey together and we share our successes and also our challenges, what we failed in our journey to combat gender equality within our own Pacific Island countries. And from there, we can know how to go about these and strategize so we can move forward. These are not easy work, but or with me, we can see that the movement is in progress. We have more and more partners coming to hold our hands and believe in what we do. And I believe it is the same also in all the Pacific Islands. So I want to thank all the development partners. Without your support, we wouldn't have come this far. And also the Pacific Women Shaping Development. They are our team. They have confidence to move on because of what you supported them throughout these years. And it's through support we can endure all these challenges we are facing. This is what we strongly believe. Coming from a matrilineal society where we have the words, it says, meaning we are mothers, we are the first teachers, we are the nurturer, molding within our family, and we're the one who brought up all the male leaders in our parliament. So, we can also help them to hold our hands so we can be a part of the partnership in our parliament. And all areas of fighting for gender equality. Thank you all. God bless.
Komol Tata, Daisy, thank you so much for those reflections. And I think you've reminded me that apart from the kind of concrete, meaningful resourcing through a program like this, it's the convening and the coming together and sharing at a regional level that is perhaps the most valuable thing we can do together. So that brings us to Viri to share your.
Yeah, I think they've said everything that I wanted to say, so I'm just going to amplify that without repeating it. But I really also would just like to thank the Pacific Women's Support Unit, right from the initial unit that was here headed by Linda and then headed by Kimberly and then being co-led by you and Leonie, right? Because without you guys and the support of the team here in the support unit, being interlocutors, being translators between DFAT, CARDNO, and the movement, we wouldn't be where we are today and where we're going. So I really would like to lift you guys up for all that background work. And also would like to thank all my previous board members and my current board members, advisory board members. It's been an honor and a privilege working with you and working alongside the support unit and the team at at DFAT. So thank you very much. And yeah, we'll see you on the other side of Pacific Women Lead.
See you on the other side, Viri. Thanks very much for that shout out. And I think, especially for you and the other advisory board members, thanks for the guidance. Thanks for holding us through this transition and helping to kind of steer this canoe through the kind of slightly rough waters as we change from one phase to another. Just as we finish up, I'd like to thank a couple of people. I'd like to thank our set designer for today, Monica Wanganisao. I'd like to thank our executive producer, Shan Bhagwan Rolls, and our production manager, Vasiti Nailele, all from the support unit. There's also a huge team of like 10 or 15 others that sit behind them. I'd like to acknowledge them all, but can't do it by name today. Our colleagues at DFAT, who are with us in this journey, who have advocated from within for meaningful resourcing for gender equality. We thank you, recognize you, and appreciate you. Most especially to all of our partners, to the women working on the front lines, to the communities, to the organizations, to the long-standing, decades-long advocacy for women's rights and gender equality. We salute you and thank you for collaborating with us on this journey. And to all of the panelists for the time today. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. We really see you and recognize you, and thank you. Just before we sign off with some wonderful music from our musician, Mia Kami, I just wanted to remind you that we'll close off this segment, but following the music, my colleague Isabel Gurney and other colleagues from the support unit will come on to take us through a deep dive into some very exciting products that we've got and have produced. Today, we've got the Telephone Counseling Toolkit, Stories of Change from the North Pacific, which will feature women leaders such as Daisy, Kiki, and Teresa. And also, of course, my deeply beloved Pacific Girl program will be doing a deep dive into the highlights over the last 3 years. So on that note, Vinakavakalevu, namaskaram to you all, and I hand you over to Mia, who's going to introduce the final song.
Before I sing the song, I'd like to say thank you for having me to open the space, and I'm very pleased to be here to close it. This song that I'm sharing is called Generations, and I wrote this particular song for my younger sister, for my younger cousins, and it speaks on just how it connects with all that was discussed today. And so I won't speak too much on it, and I do hope that the message comes through. And again, thank you, Malo Alpito, for having me, and I hope you enjoy the song. There's only so much that I could do, so I'll try my best to carry you. There's only so much that I could say, so I keep on trying anyway. Choosing to be silent just 'cause it's convenient still makes you complicit. So how can we fix it? How will I fix it? I know what I have to do to make sure you don't live what we went through. Brave this battle so you don't have to. When I fight for me, I fight for you. I fight for you. There is so much I must unlearn. Generations generational curses at every turn. And if I want to make sure we survive, gotta fight to keep the right things alive. Choosing to be silent just 'cause it's convenient still makes you complicit. So how can we fix this? How will I fix this? I know what I have to do to make sure you don't live what we went through. Brave this battle so you don't have to. 'Cause when I fight for me, I fight for you. I know what I have to do to make sure you don't live what we went through. Brave this battle so you don't have to. When I fight for me, I fight for you. Choosing to be silent just 'cause it's convenient still makes you complicit. So how can we fix this? How will I fix this? I know what I have to do to make sure you don't live what we went through. Brave this battle so you don't have to. 'Cause when I fight for me, I fight for you. Yeah, I know what I have to do to make sure you don't live what we went through. Brave this battle so you don't have to. 'Cause when I fight for me, I fight for you.
Hi everyone, thank you so much, Mia. We're truly privileged to have you joining us for this session and sharing your incredible music. Hi everyone, my name is Isabel Gurney and I'm the Gender Equality and Social Inclusion Advisor at the Pacific Women Support Unit. And thanks again for joining us today on our closeout event and to hear a little bit more about how we've been wrapping up the program. So sadly, I'm not actually currently in Suva with my colleagues, who I miss a lot, but I'm in Australia and I'm on the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. And I'd just like to acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded and pay my respects to their elders past and present. So right now I'm going to be talking very briefly about Pacific Women's end of program knowledge products that reflect learnings from over 10 years of gender equality programming. But before I get started, I'd just like to outline the breakout sessions that are going to be following. So I'll be giving an overview of some of the Pacific Women Knowledge products. And then after that, we're going to open into 3 separate Zoom rooms. And we'll have a deep dive into 3 of the knowledge areas. And the links for the breakout sessions will be placed in the chat box of the webinar towards the end of my presentation. So you're able to choose which breakout session you'd like to attend by clicking on the link for that session. The 3 breakout sessions are an overview of the telephone counselling toolkit led by my colleagues Wilma and Lai. The second session is around women supporting women survivors of violence. So the story of crisis centres in the North Pacific led by my colleague Sala with Daisy, Teresa and Kiki. And then the third session is an overview of some of the highlights of the very excellent Pacific Girl program. And that's going to be led by my colleague Monica, together with Pacific Girl representative Rosalind Siddall. So each breakout session will go for around 15 minutes. And these sessions are going to be a great opportunity to learn a bit more and hear from partners and colleagues. So we really hope that you stick around for that. So as we look to the next stage of Pacific Women, we thought it was critical to capture some of the rich learnings and experiences of 10 years, 164 partners across 14 countries. And I have to say, I feel very honoured to be presenting to you the results of so much knowledge and hard work, as this was very much a collaborative team effort. So together with our partners, we've produced a series of knowledge products and practical tools to inform the next stage of the program, but also certainly relevant to all wider aid and development programs as well. So the idea behind these is that we wanted these resources and tools to be used in the future to avoid duplication, or worse, to excuse inaction by power holders on the basis that we don't know what to do. Because women and girls in the Pacific know what to do. And this is just a snapshot into some of that rich knowledge, expertise and experience. So these knowledge products and tools are across a range of intersecting issues, including ending men's violence against women, building agency, women's economic empowerment, amongst others. And demonstrating impact in these areas is not always easy. And I have to say that is one of the things that's really remarkable about the Pacific Women Program. That commitment by partners, by DFAT and by supporters to give weight to results that above all benefit and empower the women involved. So these knowledge products, through them we're aiming to showcase the impact of that approach. So I'll briefly going over some of the capacity development tools, some of the practice notes that we've developed, and of course, the documented stories of the women, men and organisations working for change. So first of all, the telephone counselling toolkit is designed to build counsellors' skills in providing telephone counselling services to women experiencing violence. So this was recognised as a key gap during the COVID-19 response, when rates of men's violence increased and women were often unable to leave the house. So the team who created the toolkit used their experiences of counselling women and enlisted the help of our North Pacific colleagues as well. So the telephone counselling toolkit is targeted at counsellors who will train their peers on telephone counselling using the materials in the toolkit, which includes 8 modules and some really powerful simulated audio clips as well. And you can join a session straight after with the creators of the telephone counselling toolkit in Zoom Room 1. So that's the plug for the telephone counselling toolkit. So the next product as well that I wanted to highlight was, obviously behind all of the work to prevent and respond to violence against women are women such as Daisy, who's online, Eleanor, Candida, Marie, Teresa, and this photo book of her stories celebrates their enduring strength and commitment to helping other women. And as we know, up to 2/3 of women in the North Pacific experience intimate partner violence in their lifetime, and sadly most have never sought help. So crisis centres obviously make a fundamental difference in women's lives, and this photo book tells the story of women's organisations in the North Pacific to establish gender-based violence services, but also to open 3 new crisis centres where none actually existed before. So the Women United Together Marshall Islands and its Weto in Moore Centre, the Kiribati Women and Children Support Centre, and in FSM, the Chook Women's Council's Counselling Centre, which opened its doors in 2019. So you can hear more about these in Zoom Room 2, where we're lucky enough to be joined by some of the women behind these incredible stories. So the Pacific Practice Notes series is a series of 3 practice notes, and they provide practical recommendations for implementing empowering approaches within economic development programming. So to be honest, this emerged partly out of a frustration for the often limited conversations around women's economic empowerment that focuses on participation, but not on women's empowerment. So we noticed that women's economic participation is often portrayed as an automatic win-win for economic development and women's empowerment. But this hasn't always been the case, and is certainly not the experience of all of Pacific Women's partners. So we've found that for economic empowerment to meaningfully improve women's lives, it must involve some change in their ability to exercise power. And without consideration of these power dynamics, economic development initiatives can actually risk reinforcing existing inequalities. So through this practice note, we've provided recommendations for practical actions in all economic programming, including non-financial support, responding to market demands, increasing men's role in care work and labour, and also ensuring that we reach the most marginalised. So Pacific Practice Note 2 was produced together with our colleagues in Papua New Guinea, and it's about sharing approaches that have led to gender transformative change in Papua New Guinea. So gender transformative approaches work across society to change rules, attitudes and behaviours that disadvantage women. This is also working at the individual, community and institutional level. And this work can be risky, it can be dangerous, and it can be met with much resistance. But partners in PNG have trialled and tested and implemented multiple approaches to changing gender norms in their communities and also in the institutions that they're part of. And so in this practice note, we've highlighted what approaches work best and have outlined key elements to gender transformative programming that can be adapted to pretty much all contexts, building on protective customs, embedding gender transformation in project design and working with local change agents. So this practice note also has an accompanying video, which is 5 minutes long, and it's a really clear, simple, kind of fun way of outlining gender transformation and gender transformative approaches to partners, to advocates, to donors and colleagues as well. So I've noticed someone's raised their hand, and if it's okay, I'm just going to keep going and then save it for the end, because as you've probably picked up, there's quite a lot of material to get through, but we're almost there, and then we can go to any questions. So the next practice note, and this is the third and the last one. So this was produced with the Women's Fund Fiji, and it's based on our experiences of working with smaller organisations that produce some of the biggest and most transformative results for their communities. So we hope to highlight the catalytic role of community-based organisations and women's organisations in bringing about social, political and economic change and justice. And as we all know from research conducted by the Women's Fund Fiji, money for gender equality has certainly increased, but local women's rights organisations often see very little of that funding. So this practice note outlines how partners and donors can continue to facilitate this critical work by committing to working together with women's organisations and by prioritising respectful relationships built on trust, transparency and flexibility. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about, this is the second last product that I'll be highlighting, but this is the Small Grants Toolkit. So this toolkit is a resource for smaller organisations to access and successfully manage grant funding. So the Small Grants Practice Note outlines ways donors can operate in a way that is relevant and effective. So this toolkit is to assist small organisations in turn to access funding, but to also feel more empowered in relationships with donors and with power holders. And I should add that these will all be available on the Pacific Women website, but also on the websites of our partners as well, and are going to be disseminated over the next couple of months and into the next stage of the Pacific Women Lead program as well. So the final resource that I wanted to highlight is the Gender Mainstreaming Toolkit, which was produced with SPC It's an entirely practical manual of activities for trainers to use, and it's targeted at governments and national gender equality and social inclusion staff to assist in increasing understanding and awareness of gender equality and social inclusion, and is also aimed at government level staff as well as aid contractors and aid managers as well. And that one will be out next year. Cool. So that was a whirlwind tour of just some of the products that we've been working on with our partners over the last sort of 6 months, 8 months, and it's a process led by my colleague Nicole Cave. And we have felt very privileged to bring together these resources and these incredible stories of our partners and sort of, you know, trying to analyze the different approaches that are working and bringing that expertise together. So I guess just to sum up, we wanted to say that I think what comes through really clearly with these knowledge products is that when women work together, they're strong and they can do amazing things. And most of the incredible results achieved in this program are because of women who are supporting each other. And together with our partners, we've tried to highlight this through these knowledge items. So please, I invite you to engage with the resources, to read them, discuss them, critique them, share them, and please do join one of the 3 Zoom sessions that are coming up. Thanks very much. And just to reiterate, Sian has dropped the sessions into the chat. So you just click on the Zoom link and you'll be taken to your chosen sort of 50-minute or so session. If you're leaving us now though, thank you very much for joining and for obviously a very remarkable morning. And we hope that you'll stay engaged with our work as we continue and also into the program next year.